Welcome, everybody, to CyberWars 2020 and the HMGS Roundtable, hosted by No Dice, No Glory. Once again, we have an amazing speaker with us, and I'm not just saying that because he's an NGNG staff member and a friend, but Major Scott Roach is going to show us the COVID game that I had. What was that, a play test I did a couple of months ago? Or I was
it was a play
the rat
test
in the case that I thought was fascinating, and I thought this crowd would really be interested in seeing, because he's using Vassal, which we all know about, and they did something really great here. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott. I believe you guys can unmute yourselves, but just throw the questions in the Zoom chat. When Scott takes a pause, I will try to get the questions in. So take it away, Scott.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. Thank you for the opportunity of presenting what we did up here during the HMGS CyberCon. Very unexpected to be asked to come and do it, but very pleased to show what we've done. I guess first off, so a bit of my background. I work for the Canadian DND. Obviously, I'm an Army Major. I run the Wargaming section at the Joint Warfare Centre and provide support to some of our senior organisations to answer some of their more interesting questions. And the Wargame I'm about to demonstrate is an example of those sort of weird and wonderful things that we get. For me, my team, who are all contractors bar myself, I have a very, very good team that is working with me over the last 12 months. Mr. David Redpath, who is my senior game designer and is the one that designed the game mechanic behind what you saw, or what you're about to see, I should say. Brianna Provichette, she's a new graduate from McGill University in Quebec. And she did a lot of wargaming with Rex Brennan, Professor Rex Brennan, who's very well known on PAX Sims and Connections North, for those that have anything to do with that. And lastly, a young fellow by John Jeffrey, who I use as one of my research analysts and a data capture designer. So that's essentially my team, and a very good small team that we are. Enough of that. The COVID war game that I'm about to show you. So back in March, when COVID started to occur, I guess around the world and particularly here in Canada, the Canadian D&D developed an operational order for the military and support the provincial and federal government, and that was by supporting requests for assistance in certain aspects. And if you've watched any Canadian news, you'll know that we sent a lot of military to a lot of the old age pension homes, especially throughout Quebec and Ontario. So the op order was written. A lot of people were tasked and sent out to do all of this thing. About a month after that, we were asked a question, and that was, if COVID goes away and then comes back as a second, son of COVID or COVID-2, we would like to have a look at how we would manage that. And that's all we were asked. That's what we went off. We weren't really tasked to do it. So what we did is we got hold of the operational order, we read it, and the war game that we designed is based on that order. So the tasking and responsibilities and how they react to those different taskings, etc., came straight out of that document. We didn't engage with anybody else. We didn't ask questions, or etc., etc. It was a strange tasking that we got. So we then spent about a month developing the initial war game to a point that we could test it. And we did it mechanically. So, we had a map that was about, I don't know, 80 inches by about 4 feet long, and all the pieces that I'll show you that we have electronically, we did manually. So it was a manual war game. The other part of Op Laser, as the op was called, is another one called Oplantis. Oplantis is a very old op. It's been around. It's around every year, and it's basically the defense aid to the civil community in the event of natural disasters, fires, floods, tsunamis, cyclones, volcanoes, you name it, whatever can happen. So this is where if there's mass flooding like we had in Ottawa last year, where the Defence Force goes out and does sandbagging and all that sort of stuff. So Laser and Atlantis were together. So I think enough of that. What I'll do now is I'll show you the layout of the actual war game that we designed, and I'll make the assumption based off what Mitch has told me that everyone can see the screen in front. So basically what you're looking at Canada, obviously, and it's the way that the op order sorted it out was it broke down each of the regions, a number of provinces, into a regional joint task force. So starting from the left of the screen and moving to the right, so Regional Joint Task Force Pacific, then West, and then up to North, then Central, covering Ontario, where we are here, and then across to East, which includes Quebec, and then to the far right, RJTF Atlantic. What we did is within each of those, we created a placemat, and that's the large white area. On the left of the placemat are all of the troops that were allocated to each of those task forces. And those troops were a mix of regular Army and Army Reserve units, and I'll explain them a bit more in detail in a minute. Coming across to the right, there's the box at the top, and you'll see in the far right corner it says infection rate, low, medium, or high. Now, the infection rates were based off what the government, that is both really the federal health ministry, had designated each province's rate of infection was. So for the majority, they were fairly low, with the exception of West, which included Alberta, etc., which was medium. Ontario, so central, and Toronto was classed as medium. And Quebec was high, as that was the highest rate of infection right across the country, was based around that province. And RJTF Atlantic, so the East Coast, was also rated as medium. It's interesting to note that these are really based around the higher population density areas as well. The next part, and within those, the white box where it says RFA and advanced, that's where the requests for assistance come into where they get allocated, and I'll explain the RFA cards that we use to generate actions in a moment. Underneath that, there's a small box that runs through the center that says support, and that support is additional equipment that may be drawn from a countrywide pool of resources, including aircraft, ships, domestic response units, etc., etc., that weren't actually allocated to each RJTF. Under that, built what we call the quarantine and recovery process. So if troops are out on task and they showed signs or symptoms of infection, then they would be taken off, I guess, the line, for want of a better term, and placed into quarantine, where they would be tested. Pardon me. They would go through a number of weeks of isolation, etc., be retested. Any that were positive would be removed and put into care, and the rest of the troops, once cleared, would then go back into tasking. So that was the quarantine process that we put in place. I'll go through the units and the types of units that were used to support And then before I get into the event cards and the RFA cards and how they work, I'll ask for questions. So to give you an idea, oh, come on. I can't get these to come up. Why won't they enlarge? I'm sorry, it might be a bit hard. I'll just zoom in. Normally I can raise them. So let's go to Central and you'll see some of the units there. So you'll see up the top it says TFC. So that's a task force minor unit, and it's made up predominantly of infantry. So down the bottom there's the 3 RCR, which is a Canadian regiment. So it's predominantly a company of infantry supported by specialists, in this case engineers and also military police. Down the bottom where it's got TFC 2.1, 32 TBG is a reserve unit, and it's just basically infantry and has no specialist capabilities within it. And most of the regions are a combination of those specialist units and the reserve units without specialist equipment. Down the bottom, they established for a national response what they call 2 domestic response squadrons. These are predominantly engineers and are under the OPLENTIS, that is the support for natural disasters. So they have a lot of engineering equipment, etc., that could provide support in the case of fires or flooding, etc. Next to that is a reconstitution facility, and basically this is a facility that can be mobilized, flown somewhere, and then set up, to provide isolation, medical support, supplies that can be housed, etc. In the event that an area or a populace, a city, a town, or something needed additional support that the local civil infrastructure couldn't provide. Next was a military police company, broken down into 3 military police platoons. And then obviously you can see the very large air assets. So for us, C-17s, and then large air assets, C-130s. On the east and west coast, we also have, they had a ship allocated, what they call an RDS, a ready deployable ship. And then on the east coast, we also had a couple of medium air assets as Chinook helicopters. On the west coast, we also have P3s or PC3s. So that's basically all the playing pieces or the layout of how the RJTFs were manned. Are there any questions before I go into what we use to devise the actions throughout the game?
Well, Scott, besides the lively banter between some of your friends here, I do have a question. At this scale with the military, are you really collecting data points for some quantitative analysis, or is this more just like good record keeping for the report?
So the background behind it, like I said, when we got the task, we weren't really told what it was for. So we designed it that, and you'll see it as the game evolves. So it was really designed to 2 things. One, it was to show the command and planning staff if the troops are starting to be allocated, if there's an increase in the request for support by the civil populace through the provincial governments and the federal government, of whether they had enough troops to actually manage all the tasks. Also, if something like Lentis happened, there was a bushfire or flooding, because the troops allocated to laser are the same troops allocated to Lentis, whether they could manage, whether they had enough troops to meet the tasking. And then once these guys were on task and now at a higher risk of COVID, and there were infections, whether the infection rate amongst the military would have an impact on the number of troops available to do the task, or what they could employ to mitigate against that. And once a unit, like as I showed you before, each of these TFCs, anyone with signs or symptoms, that whole unit is removed until they're fully tested and gone through quarantine. So you actually lose an employable unit, so it reduces your manpower. So what we did was, we were capturing data from that. What provinces were requesting more assistance than others, the levels of commitment rates, the levels of infection rates, the challenges behind moving people between provinces. If you'll see, like on the far west coast and on the north, like there's very little, like nothing allocated to the north, very little allocated to the west. So if you had to move people from one RJTF to another, it decreases the ability to support that local area. So that was the sort of data that we looked at capturing ourselves. Being in mind, we weren't told what it was that we needed. Did that answer your question, Mitch?
Well, it wasn't mine. It was from the audience, and
Okay.
I will tell you who it came from here in a second. I got to scroll up. A lot of chat. It came from Tyler. So Tyler, if that didn't answer your question, just please write in chat. But yes, please proceed, sir.
Okay. So we designed a sequence of play, and this was the sequence of play. With the exception of the first turn, starting with turn 2, we would flip an event card. And the event cards were sitting up here. So, you would bring this across, and the event card, let me bring it down here. So the event card would be a positive or negative, unknown or unanticipated activity. In this case, this says lessons learned. I'll see if I don't know why it won't come up for me. So basically this one here says, taking one of the activities or one of the RFAs that they've gone and done earlier, from that, they learn some valuable lessons. So in future, if a similar event was to appear, it would reduce the time for that activity to be resolved. And I'll explain the resolution in a minute. So realistically, on the first turn, we would turn over an RFA card. That's here. So the RFA is request for assistance. So this is where a township or a province or even the federal government would go to the military and say, hey, we need military support. We need people to come and do this for us. So the request goes through the deputy minister, goes through the senior chains of command for the military, and filters down once it's been vetted by them and accepted as a reasonable or a doable task. And then it comes down here as an actual task to these guys, where they then go out and react. So to give you an idea of the RFA cards, we generated from what we saw coming in, there were 3 types of requests for assistance that we saw people getting, or saw the military getting. So the first was humanitarian aid. The second one, civil order. And the last one was aid to law enforcement agencies. So to give you an example, so providing liaison to municipal authorities for humanitarian aid, providing personal protection equipment to local populace, delivering goods, supporting old age pension homes, provide medical care. Civil order, protection of critical, infrastructure sites, protecting stores, controlling traffic, those sorts of things. And then aid to law enforcement agencies, supporting law enforcement with enforced evacuation orders. So, people who are crossing the border and not obeying the quarantine rules, so providing support to the police. Not acting as police. The military does have that authority within Canada, but we can provide manpower to allow them the freedom to go and do what they need to do. We also have military police. So in the event that we would have to provide support to what we call, that's an ALIA task, aid to law enforcement, you would need an organization that had military police included. The way that these cards work, you'll see that there are 4 boxes in the center. So on the left, it's first of all is the scale of the task. In this case, small, and then you'll see over on the civil order one, it's medium. So small, medium, and large. To the right, you then see the risk, and this is the risk to the members who are going on the task of them coming in contact with the COVID virus and possibly contracting the COVID virus. And again, low, medium, and high. The priority 1, 2, and 3. So the lower the priority number. So priority 1 means that they have to be there within the next 24 hours to actually start commencing that task. Priority 3 means that they've got 48 to 72 hours to get to the location and start providing the support. And obviously level priority 2 is within 48 hours. And the reason for that is it takes time to travel. I mean, Canada is a large place, a lot of remote localities. So if you had a support task in a remote locality, if you were moving equipment by road, et cetera, then it would take time to get there. Duration, again, short, medium, and long. So this gave us an idea of how long the task would take. So you could have a small task that would a short duration, so you could expect it only to last maybe a week at most, or a long duration task, which could be 3 weeks and further out. So that's the RFA cards, and these are drawn randomly and randomly allocated to each of the RJTFs, and we did the random allocation. So these are just randomly drawn over, and then up here you'll see where the dice counters are. So there are really just there are 6 RJTFs. So the random turn of the dice, so it might be a 1 or a 2 or 3 or 4. So starting on the eastern, sorry, not the eastern side, but the left-hand side in RJTF West, it just ran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then north was 6. If we rolled a 6 for the north, we would roll the dice again. If we got another 6, then it would be a task in the north, because there were no COVID reports for the north in the whole time that we were doing this. So the response and the chances of an RFA coming up was based on what the real world data that we were working off. So we were looking at what the DND had already received as far as requests for assistance. We also had a look at the types of requests that were being done in the US, in the States, in the UK, in Italy, in Spain, in Germany, and France, etc. as well. So we used a bit of the current and historical data to support how we were applying these. So back to the sequence of play. So once the card is turned over, it's allocated to a province. So in this case, we would take the card, roll the dice. In this case, it's 3, so it'd be central, and then it would be allocated into the central province. We would then allocate a force, so we would look at it. So this one is a humanitarian aid. It's provide, oh, look at that, it does pop up. Provide assistance to the other government departments supporting vulnerable members of the local populace. So this was taken from supporting some of the old age pension homes, etc. So you can see there it's a small task, so it only requires a single unit to do it. The risk is low, the priority is 1, which means they have to go now, and the duration is expected to be maybe 2 to 4 weeks. So in this case, you would take a unit. In this case, there's no specialist equipment, so you can just grab one of these guys and you would allocate him to that task. the next step would be assess the force's infection rate. So these guys are now on task. A turn sequence is a week. So they're now there for a week, and we have a look at the infection rate here. It's medium. We have a look at the chance of infection, which is the risk, which is low. So then to determine if during this activity, the week that they're there, if there's any infection, we roll a 10-sided die. Unfortunately, in this case, they rolled a 2. Because of a medium rate and the low risk, a 1 or a 2 means that someone would get infected. It's a low infection rate. So up in the top left, we grab a low infection rate marker and we place that on that unit. So it means that someone, 10% of 120 people, so about 12 people may be showing signs or symptoms of COVID infection. What we then do is we do an RFA check to see if the task was completed, and you'll see that it's a medium task. So again, we go up, we roll a 10-sided die, and whoa, lo and behold, 1 to 4, it means the task has been completed. So that card then gets removed and places. Oh, wrong one, get out of there. So we take the, oh, all right, get off. Okay. Separate. Okay, I can't separate the infection counter from the card. Normally, you can just take the card away.
Seems like the card's infected, sir.
I got it. Yeah. So I'll move that down there, and then the card just goes back into the deck. These guys stay up here until we work out what's wrong. So the next step now, we do a redeployment of forces. So because this unit here, actually at the end of that turn or that week have shown infection, they automatically get moved down into the quarantine process. And they will now start commencing the quarantine process. So as I said, each turn is a week. And the last step is a release from quarantine. So when people get to week 3, we do the test of the release. And that is, we do a quick test to see if anyone came out positive, as in showed positive signs. So that means the rest of the guys were okay, but they're now reduced. They're no longer at 100% capacity. And we would then go to this manpower table up here. And there were about 1,500 troops put on standby. So to represent those troops being drawn out, so these are guys sitting at home in quarantine or self-isolation, of them being called up to fill in. We broke them down into groups of 10, so that because everything is based on the 10%, it's the level of infection, the chance of infection. If a group of 120 got infected, it'd probably be 10%, and that's based on the data that we were seeing that was coming out from both the government and the DND. So we broke down the manpower pool to around 5 to 8%. So if we lost guys out of this, we would draw 10 people out of there, and we would grab a blue marker, and we would put a blue marker to show that of the 1,500 people allocated to the manpower pool, we'd just lost 10 of them who had been used for a task. Get off there. So that's the base design of the game. What I will do. Oh, I don't want to. So what I'll do is I can run through a couple of turns to give you an idea of how things build up and how decisions were made and how troops are being allocated, etc. So before I do that, does anyone have any questions on the very broad brush mechanics that I just went through with the sequence of play? And I'll bring that up
Yes,
now for
sir.
you.
Yes, sir. We do have a question from Merle. So much of
Yep.
your model makes high-level assumptions on things like risk. Over what period of time have you used this, and how many iterations have you played? Did the information become available during or after play that made you reassess probabilities? I bet you Merle's an Orsa like me. That's a good question.
Yeah. So the probabilities, or the level of risk, it was based on two things. It was based on data that we were taking on a daily basis to update from the Canadian Government Health Services on COVID. So we were looking at what the infection rates were for each of the different provinces. In addition to that, our Joint Ops Command, who this was for, were providing a daily sit rep on a number of things. How many troops were out doing tasks, how many troops were showing signs and symptoms of infection and being tested, how many troops had gone into quarantine. So we were using actual data that was being generated that we could obtain, and we were updating our rates that we were using, and the chances of infection. So the RFA cards, when we looked at, we said, okay, for this type of activity, it's actually a higher infection rate risk than what we've got. So we would update the card. We probably play tested this thing. Oh God, I hate this game. I've lost count of the amount of times that we've actually play tested this thing. It's got to be, 40, 50 times as we developed it over a number of months. We've presented this to an audience outside of us on at least 10 different occasions because the problem when you design and develop your own war game, you get very used to it. And you tend to rush through and not really take note of the detail. Plus, we hadn't actually presented it to the audience it was designed for, and that was the Joint Ops Command planning staff. For me, being the one military person and my other guys being designers and contractors, I always look at this from, if I'm the guy watching this, I'm the participant, do I understand what it's doing? So yeah, so we certainly tested a lot before we actually presented it properly. Does that answer your question, Mel?
I think it should. One thing I could tell you from designing games for our DoD and for hobby games, playtest, 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 and playtest more. So,
Yeah.
barring any further questions from Merle, he says, "Hey, you didn't answer that. Just keep going, and let's run through a turn."
I didn't answer it?
No, I think you did.
Okay.
I'm,
All
I'm,
right.
I'm reading the chat.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'll just. Oh, sorry, Merle. There was one other question. How did so we could run this game? So it ran on a number of tests. We ran it. So each turn is a week. So we've run it up to 4 months. And I can tell you, when you get to the 4-month mark of the game turns, um, you, the it's stressful. Another point about the game, we made the game fairly modular. So let's take the Spanish flu. The initial outset of the Spanish flu only killed a couple of million. The second wave of the Spanish flu, killed people in the tens of millions. So part of the reason they wanted us suggested that we try and design this was that if COVID came back with events and it was worse second time around, that is, higher infection rates, more people getting ill, and it's just a higher level of a state of play. We designed the game that we could scale it down or up. We could decrease the level of infection. We could increase the level of infection. We could change the RFA cards. In fact, one of the game designs is we had RFA cards that were actually allocated to each of the RJTFs based on what was actually happening at the time. So I think there's something like 25 random cards. There's something like only 15 cards, where there's only like 2 for the West Coast, 3 for the East Coast, 9 for RJTF East, 4 for Central, but so you have a dedicated card specific to that area based on what actually happened. But yeah, I mean, you can run this forever, but the most we've run it is about 4 months. So what's that? About 16 game turns. Anyway, let me just run through a number of quick turns idea. So here we are, very turn 1. The first thing is an event card, but we don't turn an event card over on the first one. So the next thing is that we grab an RFA card. Oh, pardon me. So the first RFA card is humanitarian aid. Then we select where it's going to go, and it's going to go to the West Coast because it's a 1. So this card says provide assistance to other government departments supporting vulnerable members of the local populace. It's a small scale task. It's a low risk task. It's a priority 1, which means they have to get now, and it's an expected near duration. So what we do is we take that card and we put it over here in the West. Now the decision is for the staff. They now need to work out who they're going to allocate to meet this. So they know it's a small task, so they know that one of these 3 units could do it. Pardon me. And there's no specialist requirement. There's no engineering support or anything, so they can send a reserve unit. Now, fortunately for them, they only have non-specialist units. So they can take the first one and they would allocate it to that unit. Second thing we do, step 3, is now, react to RFA and transport forces. Sorry, we just did that. Step 4, assess the force infection rate. So for the card itself, it's a low risk, and for the province itself, it's in the low risk category. So it's going to be on a roll of a D10. We know that it's going to be a 5, 6, 7, or 8 to be safe. A 1 or a 2 infected, 3 and higher, and they're okay. So in this case, it's a 4, so there's no infection rate. We then go to step 5 and we do the RFA completion check. So now we look at the task again. So it's a small task, medium duration. So again, now we roll a D10 and it's a 3 for medium duration, a 1, 2, or 3. If there's no other, nothing else affecting it, there's no infection rates or anything else, then the task is complete. So we can now return that task back to the deck. And, oh no, I've lost my thing. There we go. Okay. And then they stay there. So that's all we can do. That's all that's happening at the moment. And then we redeploy forces. These guys have finished their task. There's no infection. So they just go back into the manpower pool and rest and relax and wait for the next task. And then step 7, do the release from quarantine. There's no one in quarantine. So that's the end of the turn, and we go into turn 2. Now at the start of turn 2, we draw an event card. So this one here says under the radar. So fake negatives and defective test kits mean CAF members may be unknowingly infected. Roll a D6. No units from this region can be moved from quarantine this turn. So if we had someone who was sitting in week 3 of the quarantine process and they were due to come out, based on this, they would remain in quarantine for another turn, therefore reducing the number of units available to provide support. As we have no one in there, this card has no play in this turn. So now we go to the request for assistance again. Roll the D6 first. It's in 5. So now it's over on the East Coast. Again, it's another human. Hold on a second. Let me shuffle that so we get something new. So the next one, humanitarian aid again, coordination and delivery of supplies and logistics. So this is now a large scale activity, which means it needs a minimum of 3 units. The risk is now medium because you're now interacting with a lot more of the public. It's a priority 1, which means it's got to be done now, but it's also a long duration. So we now go over and we allocate that to RJTF Atlantic. And as I said, it's large scale, so we need 3 units, no specialist equipment. So we can take 1, 2, 3. All these units have their own organic transport allocated to them. So now that we've done step 4, we've assessed the force, step 3, we've reacted to the RFA and we've allocated forces to it. Now we assess the infection rates. So if we look at the card again, it's a medium infection rate in a medium environment. So that means on a roll of a 1, 2, 3, or 4, they will get infected. There's 3 units, so we roll for 3 units. So the first one is a 9, it's okay. Second one is a 2, they're not okay. And the third one is a 4, they're not okay. So now we have 2 units who have now, and because it's a medium infection rate with a medium risk, they are now a level 2 infection rate. So both those units are deemed infected. So we have no other tasks out there, so there's no one else that needs to be tested. It's been a week, so we do test to see if the RFA has been completed. So as we said, it's a long duration. So on a roll of a 1, 2, or a 3, it'll be completed. But because you have 2 units infected, it has a negative impact. So now it's on a roll of a 1 or a 2 for it to be completed. So a roll of D10, it's a 10. There is no hope in hell that's going to be completed this turn. So that's the end of the completion check. We go to step 6 and we redeploy forces. So we know these 2 guys here are infected, so they go down into there. And next step, and this task is ongoing, so these guys have to stay. And we go to step 7, release from quarantine. There's no one in week 3, so that's the end of that turn, and we go to the next turn. So the first thing we do is we do an event card. Supply shortage. Federal government has been unable to procure vital. Drag this down a bit. Has been unable to procure vital medical supplies. All humanitarian aid tasks are delayed this term. Do not attempt to roll for completion. So unfortunately for us, that card stays in play because this task here is a humanitarian aid task. So we can't actually test for its completion at the end of this term. That's what that means. I'll get over there. You can go away, and you can go away. Okay, so that's the event card. So step 2, receive RFA request from the province. So again, roll for the province. It's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is an interesting one now because it's in RJTF East. Because RJTF East has a high infection rate, we actually draw 2 cards. So the first card, let me just move that over here. So the first card is humanitarian aid, and it's also affected by the event card for this turn. Provide assistance to other government departments supporting vulnerable personnel. So small scale, low risk, priority 1, duration medium. So that goes down there first. And the second card, and I'll bring it over here so it can be read. So the second task is civil order, protection of critical infrastructure sites. So it's a medium scale, medium risk, priority 3, so we don't actually have to do it this turn. We can do it next turn if we don't have the manpower. And it's a long duration. So we would take that one there and we would place that down there as well. Now, the first one is a small scale without specialists, so we can take one of these minor units and we can put it on there. The second one is civil order, protection of critical infrastructure. Again, there's no specialist requirement. There's no engineering or military police. It's not an ALEA task. So we can take these other 2 subunits and we can allocate them to it. Now, on the previous one, you'll see that it's a large duration, large scale, and we had to allocate 3 units to it. We lost 2. So at the moment, we've only got 1 unit allocated, which means we can't actually complete that. We don't have enough manpower. So now we have to draw on 2 other units to now go over and provide support to that, for that to be able to be completed. All right. So with that completed, so we've now reacted to the RFAs, and we've now allocated troops, and we've transported those troops to where they have to go. The next thing that we do is we do the infection rate test. So starting with here in the east, we have 1 unit there. So we now do a test. We know it's high, but in a low risk. So it's going to be a 1 to a 3. And it's a 6, so they're good, no infection. Over in this next one, we have 3 units. So it's a high, but now it's medium. So it's going to be a 1, 2, 3, or 4. So we test for each one. So the first one is good, second one is infected, and the third one is good. So unfortunately for these guys, and because it's in a high risk, we now allocate a infection marker to one of those units. Up in the Atlantic, we have 3 units there, so we now have to test for those 3 units again. Again, they're a medium in a medium, so it's a 1, 2, or 3. So we roll for the first one who's good, second one's good, and the third one is good. So no new infections. We now do an RFA completion check. So again, going back to the east, so it's a small task, medium duration. So on a 1, 2, or 3, it's completed. And it is. So that one can go away. Oh, come on, let go. There we go. So throw that back in there. So, actually, no, I can't. My apologies. Because of this event card, we can't actually get rid of any humanitarian aids this turn. So the civil order one, it's a medium scale, long duration. So on a 1 or a 2, it'll be cleared. So we roll, and we've got a 1. So it's complete. So we can actually take that away. Come on. Oh, God. Come on, Vassal, you're killing me.
Did you break Canada again, sir?
I did. I'm sorry. Okay,
so Scott,
I can go back and.
I am going to turn this over to Matt Varnish.
Yep.
And stop recording, but it gives you plenty of time. I know that the schedule was supposed to end at noon, but you guys can go until 12:45 with questions. I know Matt will say this later, but thank you so very much for this tool. Based on what I'm seeing here, everybody's really enjoying it. And I will speak to you soon, sir. Thank you so much.